As many European states now that we just talked about are centralizing their power, eliminating enemies of various sorts, regulating their peoples closely in terms of religion and other ways, what you want to think about here is that there are multiple ways on which people can do this. That there are multiple ways that different, religious reformers like Erasmus, or political reformers like Machiavelli, or political controlling forces like, say, the Tudor family in England. All right? All these are different ways in which there's a centralization of power, and that there are many ways that that's very useful for some people, but there are others who have different ideas. One thing you want to think about is that as we go into the era of the Reformation period, the time period where the central authority of the way in which the Roman Catholic Church in Western Europe functions, based on the city of Rome and the Pope, remember many people in the Middle Ages that had some differences of opinion about different things regarding Petrine supremacy, the all-powerful Pope. There had been conciliarism. There's lots of older ideas within Christianity that had, in many ways, shown its diversity. Since its inception as a movement, there's been multiple interpretations, there's multiple different kinds of religiosity out there, all within Christianity, and there's a huge variety of it. It's just that the one in Western Europe seems to be most closely controlled by the Bishop of Rome, and that tradition continues for quite some time, although not unanimously supported. Now, a couple of things that were, mentioned earlier. There are people who have some concerns about the way in which the church operates. One of them is Jan Hus, and the other is John Wycliffe. These are two famous thinkers who in many ways are in the late 14th, early 15th centuries, and what they're doing is they're questioning things. For example, vernacular. Vernacular literature is the literature of the language of the people. So instead of, say, for example, in the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Mass is done in Latin. Nobody on a day-to-day basis except elite people may use Latin, but the Mass itself is done in Latin as it had been for centuries. Now, on one level, that retains a sense of authority and power and clarity. On the other level, it means the vast majority of the people in the audience do not really understand what's being said unless they've had it translated for them before. And so there's a disconnect there. How can somebody who wants to be an earnest Christian very sincerely and not learn Latin, how can they follow, for example, the Mass or even the Vulgate Bible for that matter? Right? So what John Huss and John Wycliffe will both have in common is they advocate for vernacular. They advocate for the use of the local language in religious instruction and in the Mass itself, in the homilies that are given to the people. That what we do is instead of conducting the Latin Mass, where hardly anybody knows exactly what's being said, why don't we do it in the local language? So in a local area, say like the predominating language is Czech, let's do the Mass in Czech. If the predominant language is German, let's do it in German. Those are the things that are held out there. But that is a problem because that has been banned within the power of the church. Also, there was a sense that at different points in time, and you saw this in the section about papal monarchy, you saw this in terms of some of the ideas of the Great Schism, there was a sense that the Pope, in theory, could become a dictator. All right? And that would not be a good sense. A dictator of the church, not the leader of the church, but the dictator of it. There were some people who were very concerned about that and wanted to limit papal power, and papal power was kind of fuzzy in some areas. Remember, during the Crusade, the Pope had laid claim to the idea of what was called a plenary indulgence. That was the idea that any person who went off on crusade and died would get automatic remission of sins and enter into heaven. That is a very powerful statement, and it was challenged by many people, and it will come back. The other thing that had happened, remember, is conciliarism. This developing idea that the church should essentially be run like a giant Congress, not by a dictator pope, but by all the sincere Christian elites together working for the betterment of all. That idea, of course, is in direct contradiction to the papacy as the lone power. Now, Luther is one of many monks, right? He's a German monk. He eventually enters the Augustinian order. He goes through the university system, is trained, and eventually takes on the doctorate degree. He is a registered theologian. He's gone through and done all he can. And in the process, what we know about Luther is that he was always questioning whether he was truly saved. He was looking at all the things like Erasmus had done, for example. The monk may look like they're living the religious life and fulfilling all the external duties, but what about what's inside their heart? Are they truly faithful? Are they truly going to be saved? Luther could never quite find that answer, and other people are very sincerely seeking that same understanding. I'm trying to be sincere about my faith. How do I get to the end, which is my salvation? That's not an unusual idea. Luther's very focused on it and can't find the right answer. Now, as he has done his work as a doctoral student and worked his way through the training as an official registered theologian, he is going to come up with and follow up on the ideas. In 1517, he is going to write and post the 95 Theses. And these theses here, and this is a later printed version, of course they're in Latin. They are, of course, for debate amongst the elite churchmen who understand the vocabulary of faith, who understand the direction of faith and the power of faith. These are internal documents that are to be sort of argued. This would be in the same sense of, say, St. Thomas Aquinas with his ideas of scholasticism, trying to put together the reality of where we live with the faith we want to lead and make sure that we're getting where we need to go. And there's lots of ways this has been done in the Christian movement. Here's the next step. Luther wants to have an argument about these things, not in the sense that he's just argumentative. He's not the kind of guy that just is querulous all the time, quarreling with everybody. I mean, he can be a difficult guy from the information we have about him, but then we can all be difficult, we'll worry about that later. But here's the idea. Luther is challenging some of the ways in which the church does business. And as he had done his work for his doctorate in theology, he came across several things that troubled him. And that was this disconnect between what is directly stated in the church scriptures, what's directly in the Bible, and what is not. In other words, if I can't find the answers to a religious question or a function of religion or an idea and interpretation of theology in the officially accepted scriptures of the church, why do we do it? That's essentially, to put it in a nutshell, that's his argument. If I can't find evidence for something directly in the Bible, then why do we do it? So he's talking about issues like indulgences, which is the idea of paying money for the idea that you're going to help construct the church in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It's sort of like on top of your normal offering to the church. But indulgences are also tricky because they're sort of being promoted as a way to help you get your family and friends who are dead out of purgatory. Now, purgatory was an idea that there's something in the Christian world between heaven and hell. That for some of those who die, it's not automatic entry into one or the other, but purgatory is that sort of, well, you're almost going to get into heaven, but you need some help, right? Luther can't find that, for example, in the concepts that he's reading in the scriptures. He can't find, for example, the idea that the Bishop of Rome is in charge of everything, Petrine supremacy. There's some statements in there that the Pope can be a leader, but an absolute sort of dictator? In other words, Luther asks lots of questions. Now, he starts to get deeper and deeper into trouble. And essentially what's going to happen is he goes into a series of debates with other Roman Catholic Christians in Europe. He essentially says, listen, I am just laying out here all the ideas and concepts I've come across. There are other people who have earlier asked these questions, Jan Hus, John Wycliffe, Marsilio of Padua, who had come up with the idea of conciliarism. I am just trying, as a sincere Roman Catholic, trying to get at the idea, what are the limits of papal power? What is truly supported by Scripture, and what is simply human invention? That's what he's looking for. Now, as he moves forward, he gets into more and more political and religious trouble, but what's going to happen is that before any of this can go anywhere, he knows, and many of the politicians around him know, that Luther is just one of many people who are questioning the Pope. That's not new. That's been done before. But many of the people who had questioned the papacy had gotten into deep trouble. For example, Jan Hus, back in 1415, had been burnt at the stake for his challenge to papal authority at the end of the papal schism. Luther knows this. Other people know this. But here's the idea. In Germany, there are many German princes who are uncomfortable with the amount of money the papacy extracts from Germany. They're also uncomfortable with the way in which the papacy runs many Christian churches in Germany. And the old adage is, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. All right? So here are some German princes who are not particularly happy with the papacy. They see Luther fighting the papacy, and even though they may not know exactly what he's saying, are going to become his friend. At one point in time, when there's an arrest warrant out for Martin Luther, a political figure in Germany, Frederick the Wise, essentially spirits Luther away and has him live in an incognito, unknown and unnamed, in a place called Wartburg Castle. And while Luther is there, he's going to be living and he's going to be working on setting up what is called essentially the German version of the Gospels. He's going to start to translate from Latin Vulgate version into normal German language the exact Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John will be his first series of projects, right? He is going to be working to bring the exact word to the people in the language they understand. Now, in time, he will be excommunicated. Emperor Charles V is now the leader of the German states, the Holy Roman Empire that's existed on again, off again for quite some time. But the idea here is that Luther has direct political friends and he has direct political enemies. And what he's going to do is he's going to continue to talk about how everything in the church must be justified by the Scripture. It must be justified by faith, not by act, not by external looks. It has to be by genuine, heartfelt, and really intense understanding of your faith as a Christian, and you're doing things out of faith, not out of just trying to make it look good, right? That was some of the same ideas that Erasmus and others had worried about, and they're worrying about them at roughly the same time. Luther is sincere in his effort to make sure that people's hearts and minds align with their thoughts. He believes the heart and mind, their actual internal belief, is more important than what they show externally. His ideas are going to spread. Some people like his theological ideas, the challenges that he's providing, the idea of, say, bringing the actual Christian gospel to the German people in a German language. That seems way overdue for many people, especially because, remember, the printing press, a more recent development, has been able to spread ideas faster and cheaper to anybody who's literate. And in many places in Europe, the business communities in those growing cities, as well as church-trained churchmen and women, as well as secular authorities, scribes and comptrollers and accountants who have some basic training from the universities, they all are literate. They can all spread the ideas and learn them in writing. And so Luther is coming across at a time where literacy is growing. The cheap nature of some of the printing is able to disseminate messages faster to more people, and he's going to, of course, see that as a benefit because many people are going to see his ideas. But here's what's the clear idea from Luther, right? When Luther said that essentially the Roman Catholic Church, as led by the Bishop of Rome, has been led astray or gone the wrong direction, he still believes there needs to be a leader of the church. He chooses the local princes. Essentially, he's taking the Roman Catholic structure, he's taking the power away from the papacy at the top and replacing it with the local prince. That may be an improvement, it may not. It also is going to inject a massive amount of politics into the situation. There's always been politics within the church, that's not new, but now you're making the prince in a local area potentially the head of his church and the head of state at the same time. That was what Henry VIII had done when he was doing that in England in the 1530s especially. It's now happening in other places like on the mainland in Germany as well. You're replacing the Pope with the local prince. That may or may not be a good step. Also, Luther is increasingly seen as pro-elite. He is offering the educated classes, the elite political classes, an opportunity to help clean up and reform the church. This has always been a difficult issue in Europe. The idea of what the church should do and what local political authorities can do, that always has been a bit fuzzy. And we've seen in our earlier lectures many of the opportunities where there had been no agreement. There had been a struggle between popes and kings, between bishops and local princes. That's not new, but here Luther is back at it again. And in many ways, the local princes are seeing an opportunity here that Luther could be used for their ideas. One of the downsides quickly for what Luther is doing, though, is that means there's a lot less opportunities for monastics, a lot less opportunity for people to join into religious groups and organizations, including women. One of the paths, as you saw in your reading, for women, especially of elite classes who are educated, to be something other than a wife and mother was to go, of course, into a nunnery, an abbey of some sort. Those ideas are being closed off because Luther is going to start to press the idea that celibacy for the cleric is something, if they wish to pursue, they can, but it's not absolutely necessary because it's difficult. Okay? So now, while Luther is pushing the idea of putting the prince, the local political family, in charge of the local church, John Calvin, and he's shown here, John Calvin in France is going to take it a different direction. All right? Calvin is, like Luther, a Protestant. Now, the word Protestant means something that is protesting, right? A protester, Protestant, all right? The Roman Catholic Church essentially had a monopoly over the control of Christianity in Western Europe. Protestants are going to challenge that. Luther and Calvin are one of many, or actually two of many people who do that. John Calvin's going to do it differently, though, all right? He and Luther do share a significant amount of ideas in the sense that they believe in the idea of Scripture. They believe in the idea of sincere internal devotion. They believe in the idea that people can, strive towards getting grace and following the Word. But John Calvin's going to have one key difference, and that is that he is going to, in his ideas, create what are going to be called the Institutes of the Christian Religion. It's going to sort of be a guidebook for Christianity for him. And as a former lawyer, he's going to kind of lay out sort of a chapter and verse kind of approach of how a Christian should move forward in their life. And this is where it gets interesting. Okay? Calvin believes that humans are so weak, so incapable, so puny in their efforts to pursue their own faith and live up to it, that the only way they could be saved if there was an all-powerful, an omni here, all-powerful, all-seeing, omnipotent God, omniscient, knowing everything. That the idea that humans could ever really save themselves, he finds to be really ridiculous, and the only way he can explain people entering into salvation is if the divine had already preordained it. Now, predestination is the idea that before someone is even born, their soul has already been chosen or is going to end up in heaven or in hell. And that is an idea that is very powerful. It had been addressed in earlier Christian thinkers. St. Augustine of Hippo back in the 5th century had some conversations on this. Because the idea is rooted in, if the Christian God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-seeing, and is not having any mystery, then before someone is even born, that soul has already been predetermined, predestined, right? That is the idea that separates them. Also, what separates them is that Calvin is willing to apply his ideas to civil society. And in Geneva, a small city in Switzerland, his people take over the city and they impose Calvinist values on everybody. They create what the Greeks would have called sort of an attempt at theocracy, religious government. That the government of the city will be the same as the religion of the city, and everybody who does not fit in is not welcome. So that's a key element that is different from Calvin. Calvin and Luther each believed that somebody else was going to be in charge of Christian faith. The way they thought about it was very different, with, of course, Luther going with the princes and Calvin doing the idea of essentially creating a form of theocracy, that the religious figure should run the state. Take a look at the theology here. Also take a look at the basic stories of Luther and Calvin and other thinkers at this time, and notice that many of them are challenging the simple idea that the Pope can do whatever he wants and the church can do whatever it wants on the basis of tradition. All of them are going back into the scriptures trying to find the information to suit their needs. Also, be sure to see if there's any of the practice questions that could help you address this very complex era of late Reformation history.